Hey everyone, I'm Trent Jacobs and welcome to SPE Live. Today we're talking with Jarand Rystad, who is one of the oil and gas industry's leading analysts and CEO of the very well-known Rystad Energy. Before we get to him, I just wanted to say that we're going to try and do some Q&A here with all of you. So don't be shy. Send us in your questions, and as we go along, we'll try to get to those. Jarand, I want to welcome you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right. Well, the first thing I wanted to get to you with today is your views on the energy markets from the macro level. COVID has proven to be, an energy disruptor like we've never seen before. But I'm really curious if we could zero in and if you could tell me how it specifically impacted the trajectory or the momentum of the oil and gas industry's energy transition.
Yeah, no, I think, first of all, I think that over the last 18 months, the forecast of all energy sources or energy mix has completely changed. So any forecast made more than, I would say only 3 to 6 months ago would be completely outdated. We have to look at the future of energy and with completely new eyes. And we have in our company just updated every forecast. Everything looks different. And the three main reasons for that is one, the COVID in itself that has cut away a sliver of energy that will never come back of energy consumption, and also speeded up the structural change towards a green energy future. The second is that basically global policies has changed quite much over the last 6 months as well. Of course, with the Biden administration versus the Trump administration, it's much more focused on the green shift. But also other global leaders has really been much more articulate about commitments towards the Glasgow meeting. And with statements on ambitions for net zero that we have not seen before. So that is a policy driver. And finally, we see that the technologies has become, the green technologies, some of them has become so competitive. So there's no way back. I mean, even if hypothetically you would have a new report from IPCC that told you that, it's not a big climate issue anymore. In any case, these technologies will disrupt the market. We will not go back to ICE cars and drop electric cars if as I said, hypothetically, the climate was not the issue. Basically, the new technologies are simply better and cheaper than the old. So all of this is completely changing both the short-term, medium-term, and long-term forecast of the energy market.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there, but I want to get you on this one. Last year there was talk of from different analysts, different oil and gas companies about peak demand. Since so much has changed, since there's been so much dust that's settled over the last 18 months, where are you on that concept? Do we see a peak demand now, or has it already happened, or is it in the next few years? And then do you see this steady state? Because as everyone points out, rightly so, that we're going to still be using a lot of oil and gas for a long time to come. People just want to know what the top of that curve looks like.
Yeah, I think like 12 months ago, we had a peak demand in the early 2030s. Now we have a peak demand at around 2026 at around 102 million barrels per day. And then we see a decline clearly towards 2050 in the 1.5 degree scenario. It is like 38 million barrels of liquids consumption in 2050. We also have a 1.7 degree scenario, which is then significantly higher in 2050. But clearly the peak demand has shifted to become earlier than we had, and due to COVID, and also due to the other forces that I talked about. But still we see that probably in 2024 we will see higher production than we had in 2019, maybe already in 2023.
So that's interesting in itself. It's a little bit of a mixed signal kind of era for us. It's very hard to read. But this leads into my next question for you about oil and gas companies, which are now billing themselves as energy companies. We're seeing this a lot over in your neck of the woods in Europe. We're seeing this even with Saudi Aramco. Some of this is in part because of these companies are actually diversifying into renewable energies. And so I'm curious what aspects of that trend, the oil and gas companies, the biggest of the bunch, becoming energy companies. How do you see that playing into all those scenarios you just outlined?
No, I think if oil and gas companies want to be big players in 2050, probably solar in 2050 will be larger than oil is today. And wind will maybe be half of that. So then, of course, you have to shift into renewables and also into energy storage and into hydrogen and also into CCS. All of these segments are very good segments for oil and gas companies to engage with. And so I think especially for the integrated companies, it makes a lot of sense to do a shift. They have a lot of the capabilities needed for this. And as I said, they need to do it if there's a rationale for them to be players 30 years from now, which I think it is, because they have the brand, they have the capital, they have the project execution organizations, they have the governmental relationships, all of that. So I think they will survive and change. When it comes to independent oil companies, it might be better for some of them to just go into a pure harvest mode, generating a lot of cash, limiting investments, and then paying high dividends, and then rather their investors could reinvest those money into whatever green companies or whatever sector they would like to invest in.
Yeah, it's a really interesting evolution of the business models, the business structure that you're talking about there. We haven't gotten into this yet, which is the net zero drive that has more or less swept across the energy industry, or the oil and gas industry, in the last year, 2 years. These are big promises that a lot of these companies are making, and I think that most people, especially outside of the subsurface business and energy infrastructure business, can't actually appreciate the infrastructure that's going to be needed to pull these ambitions off. So how do you look at that? How feasible are these ambitions? Are the stars aligning to make them financially feasible with government support?
Well, several companies claim or have this ambition of net zero hydrocarbon production, which is in one way a paradox. But they are clearly doing this then from offset, either or through CCS. I believe more in CCS actually then. Certainly, some of these companies before that the forest planting they invested in just was lost in wildfire. So it's not a very robust strategy. But I think clearly the CCS market will be a huge market. Just to take one figure, currently we are producing 4.2 gigaton of oil, meaning taking oil from the ground and inject it into the society. With CCS, our estimates for 2050 is actually to take not 4.2, but 7.8 gigaton of CO2, take it from the society and inject it down to the ground, meaning that you have to handle more mass from the society and into the ground than we are handling today in terms of oil. And if you take oil and gas together, it's approximately the same. So meaning that the scope could be enormous for CCS. This of course is CCS primarily for industry and from a direct air capture. Not really that much from power generation, because that will very much be renewable already in 2050. So this is one way to achieve net zero, even for a oil company. And then, of course, you have to clarify whether you're talking about scope 1 and 2, or even including scope 3. And I think it's quite theoretical, some of this oil company net zero scope 3, because then you really have, as I said, all this offset that could be vulnerable. So I think we will see some discussions whether people will accept that kind of accounting in a way.
Yeah, I want to remind everybody that if you have any questions, send them in to us, and we'll try to pepper those in at the end. But I want to pick back up on the offsets versus CCS, carbon storage debate, because it is just being tested right now in the market. We have seen, some of the first shipments of quote unquote net zero crude being shipped around the world to different places. And as you said, almost exclusively these are achieved through offsets and new carbon accounting. So in the end, right now the trees are there in a lot of places, or they can where they can be preserved or they can be planted. Carbon sequestration is going to need an order of magnitude or 2 orders of magnitude from the data that I've seen to scale up to really be a meaningful problem solver for climate change. So you have these two ends of the spectrums. One is this, that you favor carbon storage, but the other one is what the oil and gas companies are kind of going towards, at least for these marketing sales. They're going towards the offsets. What is that? How do we transition from one to the other? What's the speed do you think that happens?
No, first, I think just now we are seeing the transition happening on the CCS side. So far, it's only been piloting. It's only been like $300-400 million invested every year. Now we see that thing is increasing in 1 order of magnitude to $4 billion, $5 billion will be invested most probably over the next 2 to 6 years. And then we might see this scale up another magnitude, as you mentioned, towards the 2030s. So so this is happening, especially in Northwest Europe and in many places in the US. It is actually a quite good business concept, many places, to access mature infrastructure, to have tail end production, to have decommissioning business cases, and then to also reuse some of this infrastructure for both CCS and maybe also hydrogen applications. It can actually happen, especially in the big industrial hubs globally. We might see this develop. Then we will have a liquid hydrogen market and a liquid CCS market with pipeline infrastructure. And it will be some transportation, but the transportation cost is, as we see it now, too high to make it a global kind of traded commodity. So, I think I lost part of your question. So,
no, what I was getting at is if we're going to see a shift away from carbon offsets and towards carbon storage, which is the big infrastructure piece of this, and obviously it's going to take years to build up, but are we going to see more momentum there?
Yeah, I think so. As I said implicitly in what I said, for the next decade, maybe the carbon offset will be the most easy way to do it. But there is questions whether kind of this will be accepted because it's, as I said, it's really quite a theoretical effort in a way. But and then I think from the 2030s, carbon capture, utilization, and storage will be the key way to see a net zero, to compensate for the molecules you are releasing from burning the fossil fuel.
Okay, well, it looks like thanks for giving me the clarification there. We got some questions from the audience that I wanted to make sure we got to. We'll stay on this track for CCS for a little bit more, because that's stirred some interest. So one of the questions is just, what is the magic price? CCUS can be done, but at what price? How will carbon credits fix, address these projects?
Yeah, I think will vary depending on where you are. But let me say $150 per ton in Europe. Let me say 80 to 100 in the US, and half of that in the rest of the world. At those prices, I think that would drive a lot of activity. It still would not be really profitable. If you look at some of the projects, they typically still have a cost of $200 to $300 per ton as we speak. But with technology development, that price, technical price, is likely to halve or more than that, and also to be cheaper in the other parts of the world. So I think the prices I mentioned would generate quite some activity and the prospects for profitable business in 2030s and 2040s.
Okay, let me ask you this next one. Are you expecting CCUS to be a bridging solution to last only as long as industrial activity is producing CO2? What timescales are typically used to assess financial viability of CCS and CCUS projects? I think what they're asking there is, if people stop emitting, do you no longer have a carbon capture and storage business?
I think, first of all, we will produce cement for the entire century, which in the process are releasing at least 2 gigaton of carbon dioxide. So that is one source that will last, and then we will have direct air capture. So the combination of those two, and direct air capture, it sounds like science fiction and a very kind of exotic idea, at least a few years back. But we see that the options for really scaling this up, having exactly the same technology with a mass production, etc., is very little tailor making needed, and you can put it directly on top of the cheapest infrastructure for injection. I think it could actually also be profitable at the CO2 prices I mentioned. Not today, but in a decade or two from now. So I think actually it will start. CCS will start with the blue hydrogen, with the power generation, etc., but gradually shift to industrial applications, and then gradually more also to direct air capture. So CCS could be even 7-8 gigaton per year in 2100, even if we hardly have any hydrocarbon production.
Okay, and I got a couple of more for you that are sort of hitting the same vein, so I'm going to combine these questions. But how do you see all of this energy transition playing out in developing countries where energy access is still a challenge? And how can these countries contribute to the energy transition in terms of CO2 emissions reductions or even capture? Is that going to happen, in other words?
Yeah, I think so. But it's not straightforward, and it's not without a kind of a fight. But some places that are in the still early development phase, they might leapfrog several technology stages and jump directly into solar plus batteries, for example. And solar plus batteries could come down with a price below $50 per megawatt hour. With the solar part of it being 30 to 35, and the storage part being 15 to 20. So with that, you can deliver the electrons exactly when you need them in a cheaper way than any other source, and also you don't need to to invest heavily in grids, etc. Some, of course, investments is needed, but it could be a quite flexible way to develop in many early stage development countries. Most places globally now, you actually solar PV is coming out as the cheapest source of energy, cheaper than coal, natural gas, etc. So that will grow from a pure economic logic. But of course, you have some big issues, for example, with India, because the Indian politicians have the ambition to use domestic coal, and they are skeptical to import too much from China and solar panels, etc. So they would rather, due to employment and other kind of domestic policy drivers, they are really want to support coal. I think the logic for that is economically and from a climate perspective is actually very weak. Because it's more expensive and it's polluting a lot locally, and it's not climate friendly. And they might then have to pay even carbon custom to EU. So I think they have to reconsider some of these policies, for example, in India. But you could have a story for each of these nations globally, but due to the cost decrease of solar and wind, just this year and next year it will increase, but then you will start to see the new decline. It will be so competitive, so it will be a purely economic driver behind a lot of these transitions. And then to build the infrastructure for traditional fossil fuel will not be competitive, I think, in the late 2020s and 2030s.
Yeah, no, I like that, and I think you could also look to Southeast Asia, where there's a lot of construction or proposed gas to power plants, which brings us to this next question. I wanted to get you to talk about what is the future for gas and electricity generation. Gas to power, as this is often referred to as the bridge to the other side of the energy transition.
Yeah, I think it will be a transition fuel, and some places a lasting backup fuel. Transition fuel, especially in Southeast Asia and in East Asia. Then you have every day you have coal to gas switching. There's quite limited gas storage opportunities in East Asia. So when the gas is too expensive, when you don't have access to the gas, you're burning coal instead. So that's a big positive climate effect of getting more gas into East Asia. So that is really something that should be stimulated in a way at least from the next decade, maybe the next 2 decades. But then renewables, including storage or battery storage in the grid, will be also much more competitive actually than natural gas. It will be cheaper. So it's only in those periods where you have no sun and no wind for a long while that you really need the gas power plants as backups. This is what you will see in Germany, in other northern parts, Canada, maybe US, some parts, etc. Especially December, January, with a high pressure system coming in, 2 weeks with no wind, very low sun. And then you really need a big capacity to produce power. But the energy you need over a year is quite limited. So it will be a high power, low energy source of energy. And you have to price it in a way that makes sense to remain that quite big capacity without selling very much gas over the year. So it will be you have to find a pricing model for people to pay for that kind of emergency capacity.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've always lived with an energy mix in this world. It's just, the mix is getting mixed up to hear you speak. This question comes in about your projection for 2050 oil demand, which you said was 36 million barrels per day. However, the IEA is estimating 24 million barrels a day. The questioner wants to know why the discrepancy between the two predictions.
Yeah, to reach 1.5 degree, you have to have like 650 gigaton of emissions to 2100. But you can get that in many ways. You can have different permutations of coal, oil, gas, and process emissions, and CCS. And basically, we are longer term from the 2040s. We actually see lower natural gas demand than the IEA, but we see higher oil demand. Basically, and we see approximately the same on coal. But we think that the IEA and net zero estimates that was published in May is very unrealistic for the next 10 years. They're actually saying it openly that they are not only looking at structural change of in the car fleet, etc., but also about behavioral change, and that behavioral change has to be bigger than the COVID behavioral change last spring, meaning people must just avoid traveling. And we think that is no likelihood that will happen. And already in a year from now, you will see that they will be totally out of the prediction they have. So this is more a theoretical curve. So we think that the oil demand will come back at 102 million barrels per day. You will need at least 10 million barrels per day of oil from new fields in the 2030s and 2040s, fields that are not producing today. So we think this is a more optimal scenario, achieving the same than versus IEA.
We're getting a lot of questions in here. This conversation is really stirring interest. I think people are very fascinated with what's to come. We only have a couple of minutes left, though, so I want to be choosy with the questions. But we haven't touched on the role going forward of nuclear, which all my engineering friends love to talk about nuclear. And what's really getting people excited these days are the advances being made in geothermal. So how do you see those two energy systems playing into supplying, some of this steady demand of energy that the world needs?
Yeah, I'm quite skeptical that we will see some growth of nuclear, at least in the Western world. Basically, it's far too expensive. The recent projects has been estimated to cost like $6 billion per gigawatt. And it's been cost overruns. These are projects you are doing rarely. And so you have to do all the engineering again. People have forgot how to do it. So then when they're doing it, you have big cost overruns. And the price for 1 gigawatt of solar is $600 million. For 1 gigawatt of nuclear, $6 billion with cost overruns. So it's basically not competitive. So you will keep the plants they have and run to their economic life. And then you will see a decline in the Western world. I think in China, they are quite lower on cost, maybe $3 billion per gigawatt. But still, I think even there, solar will be more competitive quite soon. So it's not really suited to be backup for renewable, because the base load is such that you cannot turn it up on and off. So as you hear, I'm quite skeptical that nuclear will be very competitive.
Where are you on geothermal?
Geothermal, I think for those regions that have a geothermal gradient that make it profitable, to do it, then I think you will see some growth. So I think we have like 6 or 7% growth of geothermal for the next 3 decades. So that could be a good source. It could be a new market for oil service companies, to drill geothermal wells, deep wells. You also have, of course, a lot of shallow wells for buildings, etc. So I think that will be a significant growth, but still a rather limited part of the mix. And by the way, we are much more optimistic on solar and less optimistic on biomass versus IEA. That's the other big difference, because basically also solar will be cheaper, even in combination with batteries, than modern biomass. A massive growth of modern biomass, we don't really see the business case for that either. So, yeah.
Okay, well, we're almost out of time, so I'm going to throw you one last one. I'm going to fuse 2 questions that came from the audience. But since you are so bullish on solar, and with respect to wind, do you see obstacles coming? In other words, what are the things that are going to slow down the energy transition on the renewable side? One of the questioners specifically asked about sourcing raw materials, which is becoming a bigger story in terms of how we're actually manufacturing renewable energy systems.
Yeah. No, I think there could be several kind of obstacles to slow down, but I don't see any lasting showstoppers. And just to take a few points on that, one obstacle is acreage needed. It will be terrible if you start to cut forest or using kind of wild nature to build solar farms. That's a really bad impact, of course, on the biodiversity. And you would need, with a completely solar world in that are very much fed by renewable energy from solar, then you would need 300,000 square kilometers globally of solar. And that, I think, not 1 square kilometer of that should be from wild nature. It should all be from farmland, and it's quite, you earn like $2 to $3 million per square kilometer for solar every year with revenue. The revenue for wheat or for corn is like $60,000 or $200,000. So it's much less. So it's a business case many places to use agricultural land instead of a green desert. You can have solar plants, but you can also integrate it into building companies, over parking places, over pipelines, over channels in the hydropower reservoirs, offshore, etc. It's a lot of acreage you can actually use for solar. So I think that will happen. In terms of raw materials, I think that commodity markets show us that you will have price fly-ups, and then after a few years, you get enough of those raw materials. But you also have alternative technologies. For example, within batteries, if you don't find cobalt or nickel in sufficient amount, you can use, for example, iron and phosphate through iron phosphate batteries, which is an alternative but very good battery as well.
Well, thanks for that, Jarand. I think we packed about 2 hours of insights into a 30-minute conversation. That was really, really fascinating stuff. And I appreciate you going down the rabbit hole into the energy transition with us. And before I let you go, I just want to say thanks to everyone out there for tuning in. Follow us, like us, and check us back soon for more SPE Live episodes. Thank you, Jarand.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye all.
Bye-bye.